Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next video in the series Building an Inclusive Classroom. This video is titled Understanding and Responding to Microaggressions and Microaffirmations. I'm Dr. Carrie Cormier.
And I'm Jahari Sykes-Ratliff.
So the series is brought to you by the Learning Resource Center South. It is an NJDOE project that promotes the practices of inclusive education through the provision of resources, services, and professional learning opportunities. Just a quick reminder about some of the services we provide. We have a production center, a resource library. We have multiple opportunities for professional development, and we also work with families and communities. So the agenda for today's session is to define microaggressions, understand microaggressions, and then explore the connection between microaggressions and implicit and unconscious bias, and then understanding the challenges of microaggressions and implicit bias. Some norms we would like to go over as we talk about these topics is that we value everyone's thoughts and opinions. We treat one another with respect. There are no quote unquote stupid questions. We're going to share the air and let everyone have a chance to contribute. It's okay to make mistakes, and we are going to give and get grace. Our goals and objectives of this introductory video is to review the definitions and examples of microaggressions and microaffirmations. And as a result, viewers will be able to define and identify examples of microaggressions and microaffirmations.
So microaggressions defined, they are literally just the everyday verbal and nonverbal slights, insults or snubs. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. But overall, they contribute to a hostile or negative message that you are targeting to a specific person. And it's typically based upon a marginalized group membership. So as we go through the remainder of our slides, you'll be able to really dig in more into what microaggressions are and really identify some of the ways that we unintentionally oftentimes and some intentionally at times communicate these messages.
So microaggressions came about in the 1970s, identified as racial microaggressions. Then later in 2007, Sue et al. Expanded on this, developing microaggression theory. And so there's an entire field of study and theory behind this, identifying 3 types of microaggressions. And so something that we found really interesting is that this 2007 article that they wrote about microaggression theory has been cited nearly 7,000 times. So it has been used in a lot of research. And so this chart here kind of explores microaggression theory. And so we have racial microaggressions at the top. And from there, we go into the different types of microaggressions that can be committed. So you can have a micro insult, which is usually unconscious. It's behavioral or verbal remarks or comments that convey rudeness, insensitivity, or demean a person's racial heritage or identity. Then you have micro assaults, which are usually conscious. So it's a choice that you're making. And this is where we often think of the explicit racial comments and things that people will say to others. It could be a violent verbal or nonverbal attack meant to hurt the intended victim. Then you're also going to have micro invalidations, which those are also going to be unconscious. So we have 2 unconscious microaggressions and 1 conscious microaggression. So the micro invalidation, again, is going to be a verbal comment or a behavior that excludes, negates, or nullifies the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiences of a person of color. And then you can also have environmental microaggressions. And so this is going to a bigger macro level. So it might be racial assaults, insults, invalidations, which are manifested on a systemic and environmental level. And we're going to go into some examples in these 2 boxes here, but we'll explore them more on our next slide, giving a sense of what are some micro insults, some micro invalidations that people might experience based on their status in a particular group.
And so we can see, here are the examples. Are you a man or a woman? You natives don't have to work. Doesn't the government give you everything for free? Were you born in Canada? Or excuse me, you were born in Canada? You have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me. Are you going to stay home with the baby? Are you really going to let your wife wear the pants in a relationship? Do you know where I can buy marijuana? You speak really good English for an immigrant. Why haven't you found a husband yet? And so some of these examples here, you may have had someone say to you, or you yourself have said to someone else. And so as we venture through this topic, we're going to talk about how to uncover some of the biases that we hold. And again, it's not shame on you. It's not you per se, but it's not to shame you or anyone else that is engaging in this, but it's to say, hey, I'm aware. Now, what do I need to do to be more cognizant of the things that I say and the messages that I'm portraying? And so recognizing your blind spot is the first step. So blind spotting, just generally speaking, is when there's an object or a scenario or some type of series of events that are viewed from one perspective only, and there's no consideration for anything alternative to that. And so the root of the problem lies in the interpretation and the fact that there's no diversity to help you or someone else look at something from another perspective. And so when you have these blind spots, this is when implicit bias, which we'll define in the next slide, breeds. And that's why it's important to make sure that we are creating spaces where there's diversity in perspectives, experiences, in order to be able to eliminate and reduce those blind spots. So the connection between the blind spot and microaggression is that the microaggressions being the verbal, behavioral, and environmental slights that are often the results of the person's implicit bias or blind spot in the awareness of the thoughts and perspectives and experiences of others. So how can we take this blind spot? I always think of them as like blinders, but how can we kind of like, remove them strategically? And so we'll get into that shortly. So there's different types of unconscious bias. And again, unconscious bias is also another way of saying implicit bias. These are social stereotypes about certain groups of people, individuals from outside of their own consciousness awareness reside. And so oftentimes we hold these unconscious beliefs about these social and identity groups, and they stem from sometimes our own tendencies and again, just our own perspectives and the blind spots that kind of just flourish. And so these are four main types of unconscious bias. Affinity bias, when you're feeling a certain connection to someone that's similar to you. Perception bias, these are stereotypes and assumptions about different groups of people. The halo effect, which is when you're projecting positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them. And confirmation bias is looking to confirm your own opinions with pre-existing ideas. There's several problems here, and Carrie, you want to?
Yep. So some of the problems that we have, right, is that misunderstanding, right? What we might say, is just, again, this unconscious piece where, if I'm a micro insult, right? Like I don't intend it to be an insult, but microaggressions like micro insults and micro invalidations, they might cause minimal harm in the moment, but those feelings of negativity are going to continue to build over time, and they're going to be really difficult and start to become this burden, right, that this person is always carrying around with them. And it'll impact how they might perceive themselves and how they might think about themselves, how they see their standing in the world. And so that's going to be also challenging to respond to, both, if you witness another person committing a micro insult or micro invalidation, right? Or if you yourself are doing it or you are experiencing it, it might be really challenging in the moment to speak back to that. And so really recognizing our own implicit bias is going to be extraordinarily discomforting, right? None of us are out there to, be the villain or anything like that, or, to, again, we're not bad people. We're not intending to cause harm to others. And so really kind of recognizing our own implicit bias is going to have to, force us to recognize some ways where we might have fallen short. And again, it's not to place shame or anything like that on us, right? But just more so like, let's learn and let's become aware. And so understanding this misalignment between our intent and our impact. We don't intend to cause harm, right? But sometimes we do because we have these blinders on. So some key takeaways when thinking about microaggressions, right? That they can be verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, or insults. They're conscious and unconscious. Micro insults, micro assaults, and micro invalidations are the three types of microaggressions. Implicit bias can lead to committing microaggressions. And microaggressions that are left unaddressed can have a tremendous impact on the receiver, even more so than the microaggression itself. So now we know that we have this problem with microaggressions. How do we fix it? And so we're going to be talking about in our next video, microaffirmations as a way to make things better.